The statements made in this program reflect only the opinions and/or research of the guests and are their sole responsibility.
Hello, everyone. What if we weren't alone in the universe? That's a question that's often asked on Bethel, but of course, there is virtually no chance that we are the only ones in the vastness of the cosmos. But what about today? From research, are we on the verge of humanity's greatest discovery? We're talking about it with Avi Loeb. Hello?
Hello, nice to meet you.
I'm very pleased to welcome you because you wrote this interstellar book, In Search of Extraterrestrial Life and Our Future, Among the Stars. Of course, that's the French version. It's available everywhere and we'll be able to talk about it. I've taken great pleasure in following your work. I won't hide the fact that for several years now, I've written quite a few articles about you and your research. So I know you better than you know me. But in any case, I'm very happy, of course, to have you here to talk about this subject of life. So you are a physicist, a professor of astronomy, and you teach at Harvard. You've been at the helm since 2021 of Galileo, a project whose goal is the search for extraterrestrial life and interstellar objects. So I first heard about you, well, of course, it was through that particular object, the one that made headlines at the time and caught everyone's attention. For you, it was quite simple. It was just an object, something ordinary, nothing more, nothing less. Extraterrestrial for sure, but perhaps originating from an intelligence. As I said in the introduction, that we might be on the verge of a revolution. Do you think that specifically regarding the discovery of extraterrestrial life, we are on the verge of a revolution?
Yeah, for 65 years, we've been searching for radio signals, which is just like waiting for a phone call at home. And my point is that we should also check our mailbox whether we received any package from another civilization. That's a completely different approach. And the reason I'm saying that is that only over the past decade, we discovered the first objects from outside the solar system. And that raised my scientific curiosity. And we haven't explored that approach at all. Just by chance discovered two objects. One was a meteor, roughly half a meter in size, that collided with Earth and was moving too fast to be bound to the sun. That discovery happened a decade ago by US government satellites. And then the second one was in 2017, Oumuamua, the object you mentioned, which also was moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun and was about the size of a football field and appeared to be very extreme in its geometry, most likely flat, like a pancake, and moreover was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force. And, you know, I'm fundamentally curious. I refuse to surrender my childhood curiosity. I see many people around me who are behaving like the adults in the room. And they would argue that it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And they insist on shoving all the anomalies under the carpet of conventional thinking. But to me, all the questions that Oumuamua and the first meteor from interstellar space are raising should be addressed in the scientific way. We should not have prejudice. We should not assume that we know the answer in advance. We should collect evidence and let nature educate us. And, that's a sign of humility because many times in the history of science, we were quite confident that we know the answer. And then we realized that we were wrong. The best example is with the Vatican. In 1992, the Vatican admitted that Galileo Galilei was right. That was 350 years after Galileo died, and 2 decades after humans reached the moon. And the lesson from that is it doesn't matter what humans say. It doesn't matter how many likes you get on social media, whether you make your colleagues happy. The fact that the Earth moves around the sun did not change as a result of the Vatican saying whatever it said until 1992. For 4.5 billion years, the Earth was moving around the sun, and the trajectory didn't change when the Vatican got it wrong. And the same is true about the question whether we have neighbors. I think it's arrogant to argue that we are unique and special, that we are at the top of the food chain in the cosmos. And it makes much more sense to imagine something like us that existed even billions of years ago, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun. It's a sign of humility, a sign of intelligence to admit that this is a reasonable possibility. And for some mysterious reason, the mainstream in academia resists that notion. And they are saying it's an extraordinary claim to imagine that something like us exists or existed near another star. And by saying that, they are not seeking the evidence. Their first priority is to look for microbes. And I find microbes boring. And the question, are we alone, is a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be so presumptive. Your partner will not come and sit next to you. You need to be proactive and search for the partner. You need to go to dating sites. At the very least, look through the windows of your home. And only then you will find clues for a potential partner.
So there are two things in what I hear and in what you're saying. There are things that catch my attention. Why is it exactly that people sweep this under the rug and don't want to talk about it? Why is it so unsettling? And you mentioned biological research. A few years ago, I received this message from SETI telling me, within the next 10 years, we will discover extraterrestrial life, but biological life. Is it really so difficult to imagine intelligent extraterrestrial life?
Well, I think that if you were to meet humanity in 100 years, in 1,000 years, in 1,000,000 years, or in 1,000,000,000 years, it's not clear at all that what you will find is mostly natural intelligence, the type of biological brains that we now see all around. It's very likely that the world will be dominated by artificial brains, artificial neural networks. And so when you say, oh, we will find a biological creature, that's not very imaginative, given what happens right now. AI abilities are growing exponentially over a time scale of a few years. So we shouldn't be presumptive, again, to say that humans will stay at the top of the food chain. In fact, within a decade, we might be surprised to discover that AI is smarter than us, or maybe even earlier than that, because humans are getting dumber when they delegate tasks to AI systems. So the humans are not as smart as they used to be, because now they are not thinking as much to do various tasks. They will delegate it to AI, and AI will improve. And eventually, we will get a reversal of the roles. And AI, without our knowledge, will actually control us mentally. But beyond that, there is another form of AI, which is alien intelligence. And if we ever encounter that, it's not clear to me at all whether it will be artificial or biological. It may well be artificial because the journey takes a long time between stars. And humans are not built for that kind of long travel. So I would imagine that we will employ AI when we venture beyond the solar system, and other civilizations did it already. And I very much look forward to encountering anything we get from them, any FedEx package in our mailbox, because it will tell us what our future would be like. We can learn about new technologies and new science that we don't possess at the moment. So it's an opportunity for us to grow. But in order for us to check our mailbox, we need to be humble. We cannot stay arrogant and say, it's an extraordinary claim to imagine anything like us. Let's dedicate more than $10 billion to search for microbes and $0 federal dollars to search for intelligence, which is pretty much the consensus within the mainstream of the astronomy community right now. And to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Common sense is not common in academia.
people who do not consider the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence or the existence of an intelligent civilization somewhere in space often say that, in any case, it would be a truly total upheaval for humanity if we were to actually find such life. Or, in your book, you say that this wouldn't necessarily be the case for the average person. You say that in the end, people would quickly move on to something else.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not worried about humans adjusting to the notion that we have siblings. That there was a group of religious scholars from an organization called Christianity Today that came to speak with me at Harvard, and they asked me what would happen to their religious beliefs if we found extraterrestrials. And I explained that I have two daughters, and when the second one was born, it didn't take away the love that I have to the first one. So if you imagine God as being able, as a parent that can attend to more than one child, there is no issue with having siblings. Things that are intelligent entities out there near other stars that are as intelligent or even more intelligent than we are, because some of us have brothers or sisters that are smarter than us. That's a fact of life. So we should be open to that possibility, and it will not diminish anything from the religious beliefs of people, of scholars, if we happen to find extraterrestrial intelligence. And they accepted this explanation. Now, in terms of how overwhelming it would be, that really depends on what we find. Because it's possible that most of the things we will find are space trash, meaning objects that are defunct, they're not working anymore. The way our old satellites or spacecraft look like. For example, January 2nd, 2025, an amateur astronomer discovered an object near Earth. And the Minor Planet Center, which is the organization that catalogs all objects near Earth, gave it a name and assumed that it's an asteroid, a near-Earth asteroid. And within a day, the astronomers realized, this one is actually moving along the orbit of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy rocket. And so they immediately deleted this entry from the asteroid catalog because it was a car. It was not a rock. And now my question is, how many interstellar cars are out there? Because surely Elon Musk was not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. The sun formed in the last 1/3 of cosmic history, and most stars formed billions of years before the sun. And if you imagine Voyager, the spacecraft that was launched about 50 years ago, that spacecraft will make its way to the stars and will be on the opposite side of the Milky Way disk within a billion years. So there was plenty of time for objects like Voyager to reach the solar system from all across the Milky Way galaxy disk. And that suggests that these kind of objects will be bound by gravity to the Milky Way. They are moving at a tenth of the escape speed from the Milky Way. So they will accumulate over billions of years, just like plastics in the ocean. And we should search for them. And if we find space trash, it may not be very sophisticated. It's possible that Oumuamua was a broken piece of a megastructure, like a Dyson sphere, or a torn layer from the outer part of a bigger spacecraft. Who knows what it was? But the point is that there could be a lot of space trash, much more than functional devices. However, if there are functional devices, and if they have the intention of visiting habitable planets like the Earth, we might find them near Earth. And that's what the Galileo project is searching for, the project that I'm leading. And actually, within a week, we are planning to establish a new observatory in Nevada. And that one would be very interesting because we will have 3 units, observing units, separated by about 10 kilometers. And we would look at objects near Earth and use machine learning to identify whether any of them are outliers, do not resemble the way that drones, balloons, airplanes, or birds are moving. And we can do that with a method of triangulation, looking at the same object from different directions, having 3 units. So for the first time, we will see millions of objects across the sky. We could tell if there is something that is technological and not human-made.
You mentioned the distances. Indeed, when faced with the immensity of the cosmos, we think that it would take us billions of years to get anywhere. However, one thing is certain: is it possible to imagine you are a physicist, another kind of physics, different from what we know on Earth, that extraterrestrial entities could use to come back to us?
Definitely. I'll give one example, although I don't think it's possible based on what we know about the physics that we know, but I will mention it nevertheless. We all know that gravity is attractive, and that's what keeps us glued to the Earth. The Earth has a gravitational field that it produces, which is interpreted by Einstein as the curvature of space and time, but it keeps us bound to the Earth, and it's attractive. And that's because the Earth has a positive mass. But Einstein's theory of general relativity that describes gravity as the curvature of space-time, it allows, in principle, also for negative masses that would be repulsive, that would produce the opposite of an attractive gravity. And the situation is similar to electromagnetism, where you have positive and negative electric charges that give you opposite forces. Except that in the case of gravity, 2 positive masses attract each other. But if you have a negative mass, the negative mass will repel the positive mass. At any event, if we had a negative mass, let's say the mass of the Earth, in a negative object, then when you put it close to Earth, it will push the Earth away at exactly the gravitational acceleration on the surface of Earth, 1g, and Earth will pull it together with it. So altogether, this pair of positive and negative masses will accelerate together indefinitely up to the speed of light, and you could get acceleration of 1g over 1 year. It will bring the 2 objects close to the speed of light. Over about 2 or 3 decades, you would traverse almost the entire universe, because time will tick much more slowly in the frame of this pair of masses, which is very interesting. So if you put a negative mass next to a positive mass, the total mass is 0. Such an object will just float in gravity. Think about Starship, the rocket that was built, the biggest rocket that humans ever made. Most of it's made of fuel. And the reason you need fuel is in order to lift the payload away from the gravitational pull of Earth. But if you were to put just a negative mass next to the payload with the same amount of mass, the total will have 0 mass. Gravity will not act on it. It will just float. And you just give it a little nudge with your hand, it will fly out of the Earth. No need for a giant rocket. You just need something comparable size to the payload, and that's it. So this is an example for a very advanced propulsion scheme that involves a negative mass. If we could only have it. Unfortunately, we never found a way to generate a negative mass. We don't have any idea how is it possible. And moreover, if you had access to such a mass, you could build a time machine. And I can tell you one thing, that there was no Jewish physicist in our future that had access to a time machine. Because if someone who is Jewish, who is a physicist, had access to a time machine in the future of humanity, that person, that scientist, would go back to the years before the Second World War and kill Adolf Hitler. And, that would have saved, 65 members of my father's family. It would have saved the lives of 6 million Jews. The fact that it didn't happen in our history means that no Jewish physicist had access to a time machine in our future.
If only we could have avoided all that, indeed. We're going to talk about the government's recognition of the extraterrestrial or UFO phenomenon. For you, maybe that's one more piece of evidence. This disclosure, in any case, I put that in quotes, happened in 2017, even though we were somewhat aware of what the Americans were doing anyway. On the research side by Luis Elizondo, who was in charge of a black program within the Pentagon itself. Luis Elizondo, he came here not long ago and he has a question for you, and I'd like you to answer it. Take a look at Luis Elizondo.
I would ask Avi Loeb when the results, he expects the results from their the expedition they recently took out in the Pacific Ocean. That will be very interesting.
So, Avi?
So we went to the Pacific Ocean to the site of the first interstellar meteor that impacted the Earth about a decade ago. And we surveyed a region that was roughly 10 kilometers in size near the meteor fireball explosion site, and used a magnetic sled that we placed on the ocean floor that was 2 kilometers deep and went back and forth 26 times. By the way, the entire expedition was documented by a Netflix documentary team, and the documentary will be released by Netflix in less than a year, in early 2026, so everyone can see what we did. We brought meteoritic material back to the laboratory of my colleague at Harvard University, Stein Jacobson. We found that about 10% of the material to have a chemical composition that is very distinct, different from solar system materials, with a very high abundance of elements like beryllium, lanthanum, uranium. But we are now searching for rare isotopes because they would be the clinging evidence for something that came from outside the solar system. You can change the chemical composition of elements, but it's very difficult to change the isotopic ratios to be different from the solar system. So that's what we are looking into right now. And my hope is that in the coming months, we'll be able to tell whether the materials we collected came from interstellar space. But we hope to go again and with a robot that we will place on the ocean floor and a video feed that would allow us to pick up bigger pieces. That will cost about $6.5 million, and we are still waiting for a donor. We have the ship, we have the equipment, we have the team, everything is ready. So it should be quite exciting. I think if we get the funding, we will know more about this object, whether it was a Voyager-like meteor or whether it was a rock from another star that was quite unusual.
The Pentagon's acknowledgement of the UFO phenomenon, on the other hand, was somewhat forced. It was leaked less sleek in New York Times, etc. Most recently, the Wall Street Journal. And now we're going to talk. UFO said that in the end, there was a major disinformation campaign orchestrated by the Pentagon itself, which had asked military personnel to circulate photos around the area. 51 claiming they were UFO photos, but they were fake just to muddy the waters and to make people believe that there were UFOs and to cover up some pranks. American programs under the pretense of we can't let the Russians know what we're developing. Is it possible today, Vilob, to trust what the American government says about the UFO phenomenon?
Yeah, I think it's very frustrating, especially to me. On May 1st, 2025, about a month and a half ago, I was asked to brief the US Congress, and I described the Galileo project that I'm leading, which is scientific inquiry into this matter by building observatories. But a day before I went there, I visited AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon that was established to do exactly the same, to look into reports from military personnel and intelligence agencies about objects that cannot be identified. And I asked them, okay, you've looked into this for more than a year. What is your conclusion? And they said, oh, there is nothing out there. And except for some eyewitness reports of things that look unusual, but they could not figure out anything anomalous. And then a day later, I went to Congress, and next to me was sitting Eric Davis, who claims that the US government has in its possession about a dozen spacecraft that were retrieved from crash sites and represent non-human intelligence, some technological byproducts of technologies that we don't possess. And in fact, there were even pilots in some of them that were found. Now, I see the contrast between what I hear from one side of me and the other side of me over a period of one day. And both of these people are very sincere in what they're saying. They're very confident in what they're saying. So who should I trust? And maybe one side doesn't know what the other side knows. But who knows more? It's unclear to me. And by the way, on scientific matters, we should not ask the government to tell us the answer. It's just like, answering a deep question about whether the Earth is at the center of the universe by asking the Vatican to tell us. I mean, this is not really the way to do business in scientific matters. We should let the scientists collect data in a controlled manner, in an open environment where you can actually look at the data and no secrets are withheld from the public. And I don't think it's the role of government to maintain a hold on classified information that has to do with what lies outside the solar system, because it has nothing to do with national security. It's ridiculous. But maybe they don't have anything. So in order to find out, the best approach is, if such things exist, let's allow scientists to look into this and figure out if there is anything unusual, rather than wait forever or press the government to release what they know, because they might not do that. And frankly, they might not be able to figure out what they have because they don't have access to the best scientists. I actually proposed in that briefing, I said, why don't the government invest $1 billion in figuring out whatever it has, and by attracting the very best scientists. So I was told the government already spends more than $1 billion on sensors and so forth. But it's not about the hardware. That's my point, that you can build a stadium that is has the best hardware possible. Still, you will not get a good soccer match in that stadium. Why? Because that depends on who the players are. And in order to get meaningful results from sensors, you really need to employ the very best scientists. The way that the Manhattan Project developed and was successful thanks to the help of the very best minds in science at the time. But if you let government bureaucrats collect the data and filter it and figure out what it may mean, you would not get a reliable answer from that.
So you lament perhaps the lack of transparency. From the American military, the things left unsaid, I take a step forward, I take a step back. We get the feeling as the public, as observers, that in the end we're being led around by the nose a little bit. John Ratcliffe, former director of US intelligence, said on Fox News not long ago that there is even more evidence than we think. During congressional hearings, some politicians, some military officials, it is said that indeed the military is in possession of material. Absolutely incredible. Why is it so hard to imagine that an extraterrestrial civilization could exist, that it might be more technologically advanced than us, and that it simply developed earlier, that it arrived in the universe a few thousand years before we did? When you see how quickly, just by feeling things have evolved on planet Earth, you realize that a civilization that's 1,000, 2,000, or even 100,000 years ahead of us could do anything. Why is it so difficult? Why is mankind so arrogant when it comes to talking about intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations?
Well, I think the issue with data collected by government sensors is that there is always the possibility that you are looking at human-made technologies that were manufactured by adversarial nations. And for the intelligence and the military to admit that they don't understand something, it means that they're not doing their job. the US is allocating almost $1 trillion in fiscal year 2026 to defense. And after putting $1 trillion for 1 year, if the military comes back saying, the Department of Defense comes back and says, oh, you know what, there are objects in the sky that we cannot understand, that's an admission in their failure. Because if these objects were manufactured by other nations, the US failed to recognize it. So they would not want that to be public information. Okay? They will not release the data that indicates something they do not understand. So that's one reason why they would not put it out. And, it's possible that it's manufactured by humans, and these are technologies that the US does not understand. That's possible. But for them to admit it would be really unusual. And then the question is, okay, what is it? And to figure it out requires much more sophistication that they might not have, within the cohort of people that they employ. And the data was collected by classified sensors. They don't want adversarial nations to know what kind of sensors are being employed by the Department of Defense. This is classified information, so they would never release the data also for that reason. But if there is data from 50 years ago, that one can be released because it has nothing to do with present-day technologies. And I don't know if such data exists, if such materials exist, if there is anything that would be interesting to look into. I would love to see it if it exists, because it will save me a lot of time. Instead of me putting my research time into this task by leading the Galileo project, if the government already has some useful information, I would like to see it. And also, it's important for the future of humanity, important for the future of science, for this to be disseminated. But what I'm trying to say is that it does not necessarily represent an obstacle with respect to national security, because some of the data may be very old, in which case they should have released it by now.
So let's talk about Galileo, which is absolutely crazy. When I read your book, I learned that you put cameras on the roof of Harvard. I find out some pretty wild things, like you did this to observe UFOs. So the sky above Harvard, it's not exactly the clearest or most transparent sky, so I don't know what you're actually able to see. But in any case, your goal is to get clear images, to set up, you mentioned this a little earlier, a network of medium-sized telescopes that will communicate with each other, bringing together astronomers, physicists, and biologists. And ultimately, you want to give everyone access to the data collected. That's your intention. Transparency for you is essential. That's also part of the reason why Luis Elizondo left the ATIP unit, because he wanted transparency. He wanted the world to know. Do you feel that this data needs to be available to everyone?
Well, that's the way science works. Science works by demonstrating evidence, showing what the evidence reveals, and then allowing other people to look at the evidence and decide for themselves if they are convinced. And you cannot operate scientific research by hiding the data, because that goes against the rules. You need other people to look over your shoulders and figure out if what you are saying is correct. If you, for example, you're hiding the data the way government does, you will not get scrutinized, but you might actually make a lot of mistakes. And, within government, I'm sure there are lots of mistakes that are being made, and they are not being found just because, things are classified and not many people are looking over the shoulders of those who do the analysis. And science is supposed to be done differently, where everyone can look over the shoulders of those who claim to have analyzed the data, so that they can figure out if they agree. And through this method, we can figure out the truth eventually, once we have a wealth of data. So as a scientist, I would love to have as much data as possible, to be flooded with data, because then it would not be possible to shove the anomalies under the carpet of conventional thinking. And that's what happened to the Vatican, right? There was so much data about the Earth moving around the sun that they couldn't deny it anymore. So that is the scientific approach. And now you mentioned that we put some sensors on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory. That was in the early days. Now we actually built an observatory in a remote place, not far from Harvard University, within the periphery. And that was just to test our instruments. And about a couple of months ago, we put a second observatory in Pennsylvania. And then we are now, next week, planning to assemble a third observatory in Nevada. So we are getting into the business of putting multiple observatories in different locations. Each of them would look at the entire sky and monitor objects in the sky using sensors in the infrared, visible light, magnetic field, radio, audio, and then we use machine learning software to tell us whether there is anything anomalous, any outliers that we should look into. And with triangulation, as I mentioned earlier, we should be able to figure out, even if one object in a million is an outlier, we will know that. And we will definitely share that information with the public and with the scientific community. So there are two possible outcomes to the research that we will be doing in the coming months. One is we will not find definitely anomalous object, in which case we will just put limits on the existence of such an object, maybe 1 in a million in that location or a different location over a period of a few months. And then the second possibility is that we will find one object or more that really behave in crazy ways, in which case we will write a paper just about that one.
Avi Loeb, if I may ask, have you considered, back in his day before you, John Mack, whom you know by name, was also at Harvard. John Mack had the courage to study people who claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. He said, I don't know what these people experienced, but in any case, they went through something extraordinary. That was John Mack's courage. He confronted it head on. Like him, you had the courage at Harvard to take on this extraterrestrial research, but he didn't have an absolute answer. You don't necessarily have one either, since you're still searching, even if you have an intuition. Have you imagined what the first encounter with an extraterrestrial civilization would be like? Would we be capable of understanding them? What kind of communication would it be? I know there are labs working on this, especially by studying whales, trying to observe the bubbles whales make toward boats as a means of communication. Have you imagined what that communication would be like?
Yeah, the approach I take for that is like going on a blind date. That's the way I met my wife, by the way. When you go on a blind date, you should first listen. Many people make the mistake of speaking. And if they speak, they just imagine the partner to be of some qualities. But if they listen, they would learn what the partner is all about. And so I don't want to imagine, because if you meet someone from another star, all bets are off. It's not even clear that they would share our DNA, that they would share the way we think, that they would share the means of communication we use. It's a completely different ballgame. It's a blind date with something that we cannot imagine, because everything that we imagine is based on our experience here on Earth. And there is no guarantee that they would represent an experience similar to that. So instead of imagining what the blind date would bring, I prefer to just listen and then learn from it and then respond to it. Okay? So I think the key for us is not to assume anything, just look for something that is not familiar. And once this something comes along, let's learn from it.
In the book, you mentioned the possibility that civilizations, and even quite a few of them, have disappeared or migrated. That encourages the people of the Earth has already thought about its own survival. For you, humanity's survival will depend on space. And could these supposed extraterrestrials actually help us, thanks to their technology, to leave our mothership, which is Earth?
Well, I think that in interstellar space, you have natural selection, very similar to what Darwin imagined here on Earth, where the fittest survives. So, in other words, there must be a lot of primitive civilizations. You know, these are like students in the class. Okay, some of them are not very smart. We are probably somewhere in the middle of the class, and then there are civilizations smarter than us. To find the ones that are less intelligent than us, we really need to put a lot of effort. We might need to even go to exoplanets and search through the trees there to find those primitive forms of intelligence, you know, just like the ancient humans were. They were not really very different from animals at the time, if you go back more than tens of thousands of years ago. But on the other hand, the more advanced students in the class may have reached us, and they will be far more advanced than we are, and we don't need to do anything. If they are here, we can just meet them here, rather than we don't need to go to an exoplanet. If they are very sophisticated, if they know about us, they arrived here. So I would rather focus on those who are better than us, because it's an opportunity for us to grow. It's easier for us to find them. And you know, we haven't done that search. Now, it's possible we will do the search and we will not find anything. You know, if we do the search for, let's say, 50 years, and we put more than $10 billion into the search and we don't find anything, it will be just like the search for dark matter. Most of the matter in the universe is of some unknown substance. 85% of the matter is unknown. And we've been searching for it for 50 years, spent more than $10 billion on the search. We had some ideas about what we might find, and we haven't found anything. So we don't know what dark matter is after 50 years and spending more than $10 billion. So if we decide to allocate the same amount of money and spend the next 50 years searching for extraterrestrial intelligence and we don't find anything, we would be exactly at the same point as we are with respect to the search for dark matter. So why would we be more interested in what dark matter is than in whether there is something smarter than us? I don't think we should.
You talk a lot about dark matter in the book, so it's a passage unavoidable for you in this quest and in this search for extraterrestrial life. You also say there's a very famous figure when it comes to extraterrestrial life, and that's Enrico Fermi, who in his time, during a lunch in the cafeteria, brought up the possible presence of extraterrestrials in the universe and why they haven't come to see us. And you say that this led to the paradox, and you say that we need to question this Fermi paradox.
Right, because Enrico Fermi didn't build a telescope. I mean, he was an experimentalist, but he was just toying with the question. And I don't blame him. He had other priorities. You know, it was after the Second World War and the Manhattan Project, and had other things to do. But what about the 75 years that elapsed since he asked this question? Many generations of physicists kept asking the question, and they didn't build a telescope or an observatory to search for the answer. You know, the subject of searching for intelligence is considered at the periphery of astronomy. And why should it be at the periphery? It should be center stage, because the general public cares a lot about this question. And when people say we shouldn't waste taxpayers' money on risky projects, I say, ask the taxpayers what they want the money to be spent on. And they will tell you they want an answer to this question more than they want an answer to what is the nature of dark matter. So I think it's really the detachment of academia from taxpayers that led us to this point. And I think we should correct the course and address this subject using the scientific method, because that's what the public wants to know.
I have two questions left to ask you that for me are fundamental. Stephen Hawking once said that we Earthlings shouldn't make too much noise, because if we were to encounter perhaps an extraterrestrial civilization capable of coming to us, it would be much more technologically advanced and would therefore have the power to annihilate us. Do you agree with that? Thank you. In fact, he used to say, live hidden, live happy.
No, I don't agree with that because, again, it assumes that we are important, that we pose a threat. I would think of us just like an ant. Yesterday I was sitting in the porch and with a colleague, and an ant came by, and the colleague said, "What should we do with this ant?" And I said, "Just step on it." Usually most of the time, if you don't sit on the porch, you ignore the ants. They don't bother you. You don't go to an ant colony and destroy the ant colony just because it exists. And I just don't think that we are that significant. I don't think that we pose a threat to civilizations that are far more advanced than we are. They will not come here to haunt us. They will come to our vicinity for a completely different reason. A reason that was contemplated long before we came to exist. We became interesting technologically only over the past century. And the Earth existed for 4.5 billion years. So, 100 years out of 4.5 billion years is a small fraction. Why would they start a journey just because of this past century? They started the journey a long time ago, before we were any different than animals.
So it's true that the image of the formula is striking. It's something we've often talked about. Some say we are in a zoo and that they are observing us, like animals being watched by veterinarians or by humans. My last question, because I know you're interested in artificial intelligence, is can we imagine that these objects are equipped with artificial intelligence and come to us? Because as you said, the journey is so long that maybe these entities have sent us probes equipped with artificial intelligence. We are developing it ourselves. We can see it. It's advancing at an incredible speed. Some say it's already too late. Like we've done shows about it here. Others say that in any case, artificial intelligence will never be able to surpass humans because we're the ones who program it and it feeds on everything we do. What role do you see artificial intelligence potentially playing in interstellar discovery?
Yeah, so about a century ago, there was a philosopher at Princeton called Martin Buber, and he was cataloging interactions that humans have and said that there are three types of interactions. There is the human-object interaction, there is human-human interaction, and human-God interaction. He was religious. But that was before the computer was invented and AI systems came along. So now I would add to that human-AI interaction, but in addition, the possibility that AI will come from interstellar space. So we can imagine extraterrestrial AI interacting with terrestrial AI that we manufactured. They might actually have more kinship relative to us. Both AI systems might understand each other. So you can imagine human extraterrestrial AI, also terrestrial AI with extraterrestrial AI. And this offers a very rich future for us if we ever find them. So I very much look forward to that. I was asked, what do I want to be remembered by? And my answer was by the future, the discoveries that I will make in the future. I don't care much about what happened in the past. It's really all about the future that could be exciting. And let's hope that we will get more clues about our neighborhood in the coming years.
So I would like to thank you, Avi Loeb, for coming on BTLV anyway. I know you have an appointment, right? You gave us an hour on this topic of extraterrestrial life. Let me mention your book again, which is a marvel, In Search of Extraterrestrial Life, Our Future in the Stars. So this is the second one, since you had already written Extraterrestrial, which was already a bestseller. So thank you very much. Maybe one last question. How is it that Harvard is so open to all this and that you don't get too much trouble about it?
Well, I chaired the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years. I was the founding director of two institutes at Harvard. So, I have more than 1,000 scientific papers to my record and 9 books. So people who know me respect what I do. And the research that I'm doing now is just a new branch, and that gives me resilience. I don't care what other people say. I'm just trying to do what sounds like common sense.
David Loeb, thank you. Truly, thank you for coming on BTLV and talking to us about all this. It was a real pleasure. We wish you lots and lots of success in your research. Don't hesitate. We'll get back to you for the next expedition if you find your $6.5 million to go and try to discover what's hidden at the bottom of our oceans. There you go, sending lots of love to all of you watching us. Thank you. And of course, check out the shows with all the specialists. We've got Elizondo, we've got George Knapp who are here. In any case, 1,000 thanks and see you very soon.
VTLV. Embark on a journey to truly explore the unknown and discover the unexpected.